For 19 years, I balanced other people's budgets. I could find a rounding error buried in a spreadsheet the size of a phone book. So when they told me my own position was being eliminated to save money, I believed them. I even understood it. Times were tight. Numbers were numbers. I packed my desk, shook the right hands, and told myself it wasn't personal. Then, 3 weeks later, a copy of the quarterly budget report landed in my inbox, the kind of report I used to write. Out of habit, I opened it. I found my department. I found the line where my salary used to be. The money was still there. Not cut, not saved, just moved a few rows down under a title I'd never seen, attached to a name I recognized. I sat there a long time, because if eliminating my job hadn't saved the company a single dollar, then I had never been a cost. I'd just been in the way of what I didn't yet know. Let me back up, because the numbers only matter if you understand who I was before they stopped being mine. I was a senior cost analyst for a regional operations company. 19 years. I started when the budgets were printed on green bar paper and reconciled by hand. And I stayed long enough to build the system that replaced all of that. By the end, I wasn't just reading the reports. I was the one who wrote them. Every quarter, the department spend, the headcount lines, the reallocations, the variances, they came through me first. People joked that I could hear a number that didn't belong, the way a mechanic hears a sound in an engine that the driver can't. I liked the work. I liked that it was honest. A number is either right or it isn't. You can argue about a person's attitude, a person's potential, a person's fit. You cannot argue with a column that doesn't add up. That was the part of the job I trusted most, and I think now the part that made me slow to see what was happening to me. I trusted the people too. My manager, Dana, had been with the company almost as long as I had. We came up together. She knew my kids' names. When she was promoted into the management seat, I was genuinely glad, because I thought it meant someone decent would be reading the same numbers I did and reading them straight. So when the all-hands meeting came and someone from leadership used the phrase budget-neutral restructuring, I didn't flinch the way I should have. Budget-neutral. I even nodded. It sounded responsible. It sounded like the kind of careful, grown-up decision a company makes when it wants to protect itself. I went back to my desk, finished the quarterly close, and didn't think about it again. 2 days later, Dana sent me a calendar invite. No subject line. 15 minutes. End of the day. I should have known. 15 minutes at the end of the day is never good news. But I told myself she probably wanted to talk about the close, or the new fiscal year, or the headcount plan I've been asked to model. I walked into that little glass conference room, genuinely relaxed. Dana was already sitting down, which was unusual. There was a single sheet of paper in front of her, turned face down, and an HR representative I didn't recognize sitting slightly behind her like a witness. That was the first thing that felt wrong. You don't bring a witness to talk about the quarterly close. She didn't make small talk. She read. That's the part one remember most. She read from the page instead of talking to me. As part of a company-wide effort to reduce costs, she said, your position is being eliminated, effective at the end of the month. This decision is not a reflection of your performance. I heard the words, but they arrived out of order, the way they do when your body understands before your mind does. Eliminated. Costs. Performance. I remember the HR representative slid a folder toward me. Severance, benefits continuation, a date. I remember Dana's voice was steady, but her hands weren't. And I remember the one thing she never said. She never said the word savings. She talked about costs, about reductions, about difficult decisions. But she never told me how much the company would save by removing me. And she never once looked me in the eye. I thought it was just discomfort. We'd known each other 20 years. Of course it was hard for her. I told myself that, gathered the folder, thanked her. I actually thanked her and walked out with my face arranged into something professional. It was only at the elevator that the second thing hit me. On my way out, I passed my own desk, and 2 of my reports were already standing near it, and I caught a fragment of what they were saying. They were dividing my work, not deleting it, dividing it. Who would take the variance reports? Who would take the reconciliations? The work wasn't going away. If the work wasn't going away, then someone still had to do it. And if someone still had to do it, then the company hadn't actually removed the cost of doing it. They just removed me. I want to be honest about the next few days, because this is the part where most people assume you become a detective. I didn't. I became tired. I packed 19 years into 2 boxes. I wrote handoff notes for the people taking my work because that's who I am, and because some part of me still wanted to leave the numbers in good hands. I felt the particular shame that comes with being told you are too expensive to keep, the quiet voice that says maybe you got comfortable, maybe you stopped being worth it. But the analyst in me wouldn't go all the way to sleep, because the math didn't close. It's a simple principle, the one I'd build a career on. If a task still has to be done, eliminating the person doesn't eliminate the cost. It just moves it. Maybe you move it on as someone cheaper. Maybe you move it on as someone already there for free until they burn out. But the work is a cost, and the cost doesn't vanish because a name comes off an org chart. My severance letter said, in flat HR language, position eliminated for budgetary reasons. In my own reports, 2 desks over were carving up that position's work like it was Thanksgiving dinner. Those 2 facts could not both be true in the way they were being told to me. Either the work was unnecessary, in which case why divide it so carefully, or the work was necessary, in which case the budget hadn't been reduced at all. I sat with that for a week, and then, out of 19 years of pure habit, I remembered something. I had never been taken off the quarterly budget report distribution list. I want to be clear because it matters. I didn't break into anything. I didn't take a single document on my way out. The quarterly report goes out automatically to a list, and my name was still on that list when the new one published, because in the rush to remove my chair, no one had remembered to remove my email. It landed in my inbox like it had 100 times before, and out of habit, the same habit that makes you check a stove you know you turned off, I opened it. I went straight to my department, the way you go straight to your own name in a yearbook. I found the total spend for the quarter, and I did the one piece of arithmetic that started everything. I compared it to the quarter before, the last one I'd built myself. It was the same. Within a rounding error, the department's total spend had not gone down. The cost reduction that had cost me my job had produced no reduction at all. For a second, I thought I'd misread it. I'm an analyst. My first assumption is always that I'm the one who made the mistake. So I checked it 3 times, line by line, the way I checked 1,000 reports. The total held. Whatever had happened, the money had not left the department, which meant it was still in there, somewhere. So I read the lines one by one, the way I used to, and about 2/3 of the way down, I found it, a line sitting almost exactly where my salary used to sit for almost exactly the same figure. Same magnitude, same place in the structure. But the label was different. Where my title had been, the report now read Strategic Operations Specialist. I stared at that for a long time, because I knew that line. I'd built the template it lived in. A salary line doesn't move on its own. Someone has to take the dollars from one row and put them in another and give the new row a name. My job hadn't been cut. It had been renamed. Not cut, not saved, reallocated. A few rows down, under a title that sounded like it belonged in a strategy deck, for the same money they told me the company could no longer afford to spend on me. I felt the first real anger then, and I recognized it for what it was, useful but dangerous. Anger makes you want to send an email you can't take back. So I did the thing my career had trained me to do instead. I didn't accuse. I asked the next question. There was a name attached to that new line, and I recognized it. It wasn't a stranger. It was someone who had been brought in a few months earlier through the VP's office, through Reyes, the VP of operations. Younger, capable enough, I'm sure, but with maybe 4 years of experience to my 19. Hired, I now understood, into a role that my budget line had paid to create. The strategic operations specialist was doing a strategic sounding version of the work my reports were quietly dividing up 2 desks over. I sat with that, and I made myself a promise. One line is not a story. One line is favoritism at worst, coincidence at best, and I had spent 19 years refusing to call a single data point a trend. If I was going to believe what I was starting to believe, I needed more than my own grievance dressed up as analysis. So I went looking for the pattern. And the report made that easy because I designed it to be easy. I pulled the 2 previous quarters, still sitting in my inbox from when I'd authored them, and I started reading other people's departments the way I'd read my own. That's when I remembered Paul. Paul had been let go 2 quarters before me, from a different department entirely. We weren't close, but we'd been around the same long time. And when it happened, I remembered thinking the company was losing someone who actually knew where the bodies were buried budget-wise. At the time, I'd been told the same thing everyone was told. Restructuring, cost reduction, nothing personal. I hadn't questioned it. It hadn't been my department, and grief over someone else's job is always easier to set down. I found Paul's old department in the report. I found the quarter he left, and I found his salary line gone, eliminated the way mine was supposed to be. Then I found it again 1 quarter later. Same department, new title, a connected hire. And when I checked the department total the way I'd checked my own, it told the same story. The spend hadn't dropped. Paul's removal had saved his department exactly nothing, down to the dollar, because his money had simply changed rows and changed names. 2 is not a coincidence. 2 is a pattern. My hands were cold, and not from the office air. I called Paul that night. I didn't lead him. I just asked him what they told him when they let him go. There was a pause, and then he said it, almost word for word. They said it was budget, cost reduction. They said it wasn't about me. The same word, budget, the same sentence, handed to a different person in a different department 2 quarters apart. 2 people who'd spent decades learning to read exactly the kind of report that would have exposed it, removed, and then quietly replaced with the savings that were never saved. I didn't sleep much that night, but I wasn't grieving anymore. I was working. The next day, I found the 3rd one. A different department again, the same structure, an experienced role eliminated for budgetary reasons, the line reappearing a quarter later under a new, strategic-sounding title, filled by someone who'd come up through the same office. 3 eliminations. 3 reappearing lines. All of them, when I traced the reporting structure, sitting underneath the area Reyes had reorganized. And that was the moment the whole thing turned over in my head and stopped being about me at all. Because here's what I finally understood, and it's the part that still keeps me up some nights. Not because it's evil, but because it's so ordinary. Reyes hadn't stolen anything. There was no secret account, no kickback, no cartoon villain rubbing his hands. What there was a hiring freeze. And I knew about the freeze because I'd had to live inside it. Months earlier, before any of this touched me, I'd been asked to model the headcount plan around a corporate directive. No net new positions company-wide until further notice. I'd built that model myself. I'd seen the memo. At the time, it had just been another constraint, the kind you work around. I never imagined it was the reason a glass conference room had my name on a calendar invite. Corporate had frozen new headcount across the company. Reyes had a vision, a strategic operations team, his own people, built his way, and no way to hire them, because you cannot add heads when heads are frozen. But you can eliminate existing positions. And when you eliminate a position, its budget line frees up. And a freed up budget line can be quietly renamed and refilled, because that's not adding headcount on paper. That's restructuring within existing budget. Budget neutral, the exact phrase from the all hands. He couldn't hire forward, so he hired sideways, by removing the experienced people whose salaries he needed and rebuilding their jobs under new names for the people he wanted. And the only language that would get the eliminations approved up the chain, the only sentence corporate would sign, was the one they read to me in that glass room. Cost reduction. Saving money. It was never about saving money. The money never moved an inch out of the department. It was about who got to spend it and on whom. I understood it. That was the worst part. I didn't hate him in that moment so much as I understood him, the way you understand a man who takes the only door that's unlocked. And understanding it didn't make it right. It just made it real. But understanding the why led me straight to a harder question, and it was the one I'd been avoiding. If the numbers had been rewritten to read as savings, if someone had taken a reallocation and dressed it up as a reduction, then someone had to approve that wording. Someone had to put their name on a summary that called this budget-neutral restructuring a cost cut. And those reports were prepared under one department. Mine, the one I'd built, the one Dana now ran. I didn't want to look. I want to be honest about that. I went looking for the approvals slowly, the way you walk toward a phone call you already know is bad. The restructuring summaries, the documents that translated the raw budget moves into the clean, leadership-ready story of savings, carried a sign-off. And on the summary that covered my elimination, the approval initials were Dana's. I checked the other two summaries, Paul's department, the third one. Different managers had signed those, each one approving their own piece, none of them seeing the whole. That was the design of it. No single person had to know the entire truth. Each of them only had to sign the small line in front of them, the one that said savings, and trust that someone above them had done the math. The pattern wasn't in any one signature. It was in all of them not looking. I sat back from the screen. It's a strange grief, learning that the person who taught you the right way to read a number had signed her name under the wrong one. I don't think Dana built the scheme. I don't think she even fully saw it. I think she was handed a summary that said savings and a target she'd been told to hit, and she signed it because looking too closely would have cost her something too. That's the realism of it. The deepest damage in that whole story wasn't done by the man with the plan. It was done by all the decent people who decided not to look, including, for a few days, me. So I stopped being a victim of the report and went back to being its author. I gathered everything, 3/4 of budget reports, the eliminated lines, the reappearing lines, the matching figures, the names, the structure that tied them all back to one reorganization. I built it into a single, clean packet. No acquiescents, no adjectives, just columns. The same kind of report I'd spent 19 years making, except this time the variance it exposed was the truth. I asked Dana for one meeting first. I owed her that, and I owed myself the chance to be wrong. I laid out 2 pages. I watched her read them, and I watched her do the thing that told me everything. She didn't argue with the numbers. She couldn't. They were her own departments. She said, quietly, that there were targets, that the decisions came from above her level, that she'd done what she was asked. Every sentence was a small door closing, and every closed door pointed up the same staircase, toward Reyes, toward the office that needed to freeze to look like thrift. She wasn't lying exactly. She was just confirming, one deflection at a time, that the language of savings had been handed down to her, and she'd passed it along rather than question it. When I left her office, I wasn't angry anymore. I was decided. I took the packet to internal audit and corporate finance. Not to the press, not to a lawyer first, not to a screaming match in the parking lot. To the one place in a company that is built to do exactly what I've been doing alone at my kitchen table. Check whether the numbers say what people claim they say. I won't pretend it was dramatic. There was no confession, no executive marched out by security. There almost never is. What there was a review. Audit pulled the same lines I had. They traced the same reappearing salaries. They went further than I could, too. They pulled the original restructuring proposals, the ones that promised a specific dollar figure in savings to corporate, and they laid those promised numbers next to the actual department totals. The promises said one thing. The totals said another. The gap was the whole story, in 2 columns. They confirmed the thing I'd staked my career's worth of judgment on. The budget-neutral restructuring had produced no net savings because it was never designed to. It had reduced experience, not cost. The justification that had been signed and sent up the chain did not match the money underneath it. The findings were quiet, and they were devastating in the way only a true thing can be. The restructuring justifications had misrepresented what the eliminations actually did. Reyes was placed under a leadership review, not fired in a thunderclap, but moved off the reorganization. His strategic operations build halted and unwound. And the part I'm most proud of, the part that will outlast all of us, the company added a rule. Before any position could be eliminated for savings, finance now had to verify a real net reduction in spend. You can no longer call moving money the same thing as cutting it. Not on paper. Not anymore. Audit asked to meet with me near the end. I thought for one foolish second that they were going to offer me my job back. They didn't. The role didn't even exist anymore in the honest version of the budget. That was the whole point. What they offered instead was the truth in writing, a corrected reason for my departure, a corrected reference, a corrected severance that reflected what had actually happened instead of the story they told. And from someone fairly high up, an apology that I could tell cost them something to give. I sat with whether that was a win. It's a strange kind of victory, the one where you're proven right and still unemployed. The job was gone. The years were gone. I wasn't going to walk back into that glass conference room and undo the moment Dana read from a page she wouldn't look up from. But here's what I got, and it turned out to be the thing I actually needed. I got my number back. For weeks, I'd carried the quiet idea that maybe I really had become a cost. Too comfortable, too expensive, a line worth cutting. The reports answered that, finally and completely. I had never been a cost. The department spent exactly the same money the day after I left as the day before. I wasn't too expensive. I was just inconvenient to someone's plan, and the cheapest word they had for that inconvenience was savings. Dana reached out once, months later. It wasn't much. A short message that said she should have looked closer and that she was sorry she hadn't. I believe she meant it. I didn't need her to fall on a sword. I just needed her to say, out loud, that she'd known how to read the number and had chosen not to. She did. That was enough to set it down. I read budgets for a different company now. Smaller, less polished, the reports nowhere near as elegant as the ones I built in those 19 years. I don't mind. I still hear the number that doesn't belong. I still check the stove I know I turned off. People ask me, sometimes, if I'm bitter about how it ended. I tell them the truth, which is that bitterness assumes you were robbed of something real, and what I lost was never as real as I believed. They didn't take my worth. They couldn't. It was sitting right there in the report the whole time, in black ink, in a total that refused to go down no matter whose name they took off the chart. That's the thing about money. People can rename a line. They can dress a reallocation up in strategic language and hand it to a man who won't meet your eyes. They can call moving it saving if for exactly as long as no one who knows how to read the report is still looking. But the numbers always remember where the money went. I know, because for 19 years, I was the one who remembered for them. And the night I opened that report out of habit, the numbers remembered for me. I sleep fine now.